RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOps AF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
All right, RevOpsAF listeners, quick question. How many times have you been asked to define your TAM, SAM, SOM, redesign territories, or do white space analysis without the data you actually need to do it right? That's exactly why today's episode is brought to you by HG Insights, the platform RevOps teams rely on to power go-to-market strategy with AI-powered revenue growth intelligence. HG Insights gives you the best-in-class stuff you can't get anywhere else. Technographics tell you who's using what technology across your ICP. Install data tells you which accounts are using competitors you can displace. Spend intelligence tells you who's investing in your category and how quickly. Market context tells you which accounts are growing, contracting, or primed for outreach. And TAM and segmentation data that's actually defensible with your CRO and finance. Imagine building territories with confidence. Imagine surfacing the highest value accounts before sales even ask. Imagine going into planning with facts, not vibes. If RevOps is the engine of go-to-market, HG Insights is the fuel that makes it run smarter, faster, and with fewer, let me get back to you moments. To learn more, head over to hginsights.com. That's hginsights.com.
Hello, this is RevOps AF, the podcast, and I'm one of your co-hosts, Camela Thompson. Today, I am joined by my Seattle chapter of RISE co-chapter lead, Allen Smolinski. Al, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, my background really started in a small mom pop shop. And so my family, we had a company that basically created scroll rods and frames for cross stitching. I'm sure that some folks might know this and some folks who don't. Those folks who don't, if you can imagine the grandma when she was stitching and she was doing this embroidery on a piece of cloth, and sometimes you would see it in the walls. That's cross stitching. And so my family produced all the frames, the wood frames and wood composites for that hobby. And so for me, I was heavily integrated in that business. And what was fun is the fact that my parents didn't want to mess with technology, so they just left it to me. We had the CNC router machines. It was a lot of fun from that standpoint of view. And they just weren't excited the second you had to hit a digital button. You had to hit a button and had to have some sequence to it. So I got my start just because I had a lot of interest in that. And I was doing a lot of the systems and admin back work for them. And when I got into college, I started realizing their portfolio was really messed up. And what I mean by that is their predominant customer was one distributor. And I had an aha moment. I started realizing, why aren't we leveraging more distributors? Why aren't we leveraging what is considered partnerships and the partner ecosystem? I didn't really know what it was until I was having conversations with this distributor. And so 95% of our business was through that one distributor, that's a bad ratio. And that started getting me into more of the partnership space and more into the operations space. I've always been and always will be a data analytics guy, very technology focused individual. And so that basically launched me into my career, 20 plus years in partner ecosystems as a specialization, program management, data analytics. And all of that stemmed from being so focused on technology and data analytics, right? Data analytics to ops to program management was the natural progression in my career.
And I love how you already touched on an example of partner ecosystems that isn't B2B SaaS. So maybe we start with, I hear a lot of CEOs say we need to start developing partnerships, but where does it really make sense and where does it maybe not make sense for a business?
Yeah, technically, partner ecosystems make sense for every business organization because it's just an existing thing. Whether you're a sub shop, right, you're going to be working with vendors. Those vendors are partnerships in some sense, right? You're going to want to have some kind of backup plan. I've seen too many organizations rely on one specific vendor, right? You can have that one-on-one relationship. It's still a partnership, right? It's just how you define it, how you structure it between both organizations. And even if you're a freelance consultant, I think that's a huge gap within this space, is that there's less of an alliance factor that's occurring within the consulting space and for individuals. Where it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense is probably in those organizations where you're completely isolated from a lot of those factors, right? You don't go out, you don't have a manufacturing, you don't have a need for or dependency to have a referral network or affiliate or any components to that. And so what I would say is that those cases are more rare. Do they exist? Yeah. If you're an influencer, I would say that's probably an example. Do you need a partner ecosystem? No, because you could primarily do things online and be self-sufficient. Now, is that a good strategy? I would say no, absolutely not. And that's kind of where it pivots back to every organization has some form factor of partner ecosystems. It just depends on how formal, informal it is for you and in that space. And then when it comes to industries, certain industries are heavily dependent or reliant on it. Again, manufacturing being one, medical space, huge need for partner ecosystems having more of a formalized program and process behind it.
Yeah, my brain went to medical, like imaging equipment and all of these different like physical pieces of equipment or pharmaceutical, all of those things. The main manufacturer is working with a lot of people who resell or sell for them, distributors. But software, I was in software back when you also had hardware components. Mm-hmm. So partner ecosystems were really important there, where you had a distribution center and then you had resellers who could also act as implementers and consultants when it came to the actual product. Nowadays, I see a bit more on the technology partner side, where B2B SaaS, you're not building your product from scratch. You've got components where you bring in somebody who already does something really well. And then you also have really complex products that need people who act as that expert and reseller. So what are the most common examples, just so people have a tangible thing in their head of where you would come in and say, yep, you're going to need help with this. You definitely have a partner ecosystem you need to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it really comes down to if you're selling to a customer, and if you're in SaaS or you're software, you're going to need to have some form of partnership or partner program in that space. But this is where the complexity, or I would say more of the space, really opens up. There's so many different partner types. You've just labeled a few of them, right? You have distributors, you have resellers, you have system integrators, you have tech partnerships, which is a big one, especially for startups and organizations within the tech space. And there's always the question of like, why and how does that work? Key examples, if you're in the cloud, you're going to be working with a partner. 100% of your deals, everything that you're doing. Why? Because it's probably AWS, it's Azure, it's Google. You could start getting into Oracle, Dell. Even these organizations have got cloud services. So now they're different tiering, and your relationship might look differently, right? And so you're going to have some form of dependency on the partner when you're doing and you're building out your products and how you're bundling your products and how you're going to go to market together. So there's all these components. And then so for me, whenever I see that there's a sales process for an organization, I automatically think, how are your partners layered into the space? Like, how are you managing? How are you building out your programs? What are you doing to drive more strategy and monetize off of those relationships? And then creating those synergies with those partners. Because those partners, if they don't care about you, you're not going to get referrals and leads. And they're just more of a service partner to you rather than some an organization that could have that tech partnership relationship. And a lot of times when we start defining some of these programs, they can have a little bit of an overlap. And what I mean by that is there could be some overlaps between how someone might view a VAR or an SI, right? Because both can do forms of implementation and both can actually resell and to end the customer. But it's how they're viewed out publicly in the space, right? When you have an example is Accenture, right, or Deloitte, it's easy to go and think, okay, they're a system integrator. They're not going to necessarily be a tech partner at this point in time until we start getting into the AI conversation, how that's going to look within the partnership space. your tech partners now start becoming more of the AWS, the Microsoft of the world, right? So within an organization, it's just really understanding about who their customers are, what the product fit looks like, and then those natural and native relationships that should exist with the partnerships and where they fit in. Because in some cases, like for example, if you're in the federal space, if you don't have a partner program, you're going to have problems. You're going to have challenges, right?
That's a perfect example of where you need somebody full-time, or at least one person, at least.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, relationship selling, it's nice when you have a product that just sells itself and you have a wide total addressable market. But when you have something super specialized, you're so dependent on relationship building and having somebody who's been in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. Just even look at the RevOps community, right? As we're interacting or having conversations, these are partnerships. This is a form of our partner ecosystem where we're working and collaborating with each other because of those different areas of specialization. Because, I mean, there's some things that people love, right? And there's some things that people don't love. I just recently had a meeting yesterday with a great group of folks of enablement. And I was laughing with them in the sense of saying, okay, if you're in RevOps, right, it's amazing what the expectations are when you're in RevOps. Partner operations, same thing. There's the overlap. But then when someone starts talking about enablement, it's like, oh, wait, you realize that enablement is it's not a singular thing. It's not an all-encompassing thing, right? And then they want to start talking about sales training, and we're doing the infrastructure and operations and data modeling analytics. We are not sales trainers. We will help productivity from the sales side, right? And then even in partner operations, it's the same thing. Now you start multi-pronged approach to what you're going to do, right? Internal versus external versus executive, right? So these are things where partnerships are always going to exist in some capacity with each other, whether it's at an individual level or at a company level. And it's just understanding and organizing how you want to create those alliances and those relationships, right?
I think that's a really great segue into talking about what should the typical partner operations job description look like? What do they cover? Where should we draw lines? And I'm thinking it depends is probably going to be your primary answer.
I think some of that actually happens to fall under resources. The unfortunate part is oftentimes organizations don't hire for partner operations. They rely on the revenue operations to go do that, which I think is so unfortunate because you need to have that subject matter expertise behind that individual, and it's a whole world on its own. It doesn't mean that RevOps folks are incapable. I would say it's more of a capacity issue.
Yeah.
There's so much to be done just in revenue operations. Then when you want to start incorporating partner operations and the complexity and the things that are going to exist there, you're losing money not having someone in partner operations to collaborate and work with revenue operations. And I think that there's synergies too. In partner operations, there's that upwards management, but there's also that level of being able to help readjust and rethink how the infrastructure should work. And now you get, because of those synergies, you get better productivity, you get a better infrastructure, you get a better format to how you're executing within from an organizational standpoint of view. So I would say that there are some pretty outliers between typical RevOps and the partner operations in the sense that because it's partner operations, you're going to be dealing a lot externally versus RevOps focuses primarily internally. And I have a presentation deck on this that kind of shows RevOps, we're very internally focused, but we're heavily also oriented with the customer. That's super important, right? In partner operations, it doesn't just stop at internal customer, it extends out to partnerships and how that's going to look. And then the engagement of what you need to do to execute externally with those partnerships to bring them through the internal processes and get it to the end customer so then there's an alignment from A to Z. So another example is in partner operations, oftentimes we manage and we deal with legal contracts. RevOps, what do? We have a tendency to work with legal. It's legal's responsibility. We manage the handoff process from an operation and systematic side. And then the delivery out to the end customer sometimes falls on PS or CS. or if you have a deal desk team. So it just really depends on how that's managed internally within our organization. Partner operations, you handle that from A all the way through to the end customer oftentimes, because let's say you mentioned VARs, right? VARs, working with VARs, right? So anytime you start dealing with quotes, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to engage internally and externally, right? Revenue operations is not necessarily doing that. So I would say those are some examples of outliers between revenue operations and partner operations, and why there is always a need for a partner operations to exist within an organization in some form and fashion.
Yeah, I always dreaded when partner operations fell on my plate when I was also focused on the go-to-market teams. And the main reason for that is I had no exposure to the partners. I've never talked to them. I don't know what systems they're already using, how they need to integrate with our selling motion. There's just a lot of discovery that wasn't really allowed to take place. It was just being shoved into, you need to set up a partner portal. And then people would complain about how low the adoption was. Let's talk about, I just gave an example of how that shouldn't work. Mm-hmm. Ideally, how should business leaders be thinking about engaging resources to handle something like that?
Yeah, the focus should always be on driving simplicity. I think oftentimes what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing and what's existing out in the ethos is that there's just too much complexity behind it, and we keep on layering more and more complexity into it. You mentioned, for example, the deal registration process, the partner portals. They're a tool, and they shouldn't be the means to the way of the process. And I think there's far better ways to create that and simplify it than just necessarily saying, hey, go partner, go throw your opportunity or your lead into the system, and then you'll wait to find out what's happening or what the challenges are, or what the next steps are. And then it takes you months to finally get the opportunity within a cycle. So this just leads back to the simplicity, right? It's the execution behind the simplicity. How you take both the infrastructure, the relationships, and the systems to a more simplified format, right? To start eliminating a lot of the noise as much as possible. And then there's challenges because partner ecosystems are such an afterthought that by the time you start engaging, now all of a sudden you're having to do re-architecture. You're having to redesign your data model. You're going to have to redesign some of your operational processes. Either that, or you're smashing in Band-Aids to fix the gaps. And that's all they are, is Band-Aids. And they're going to create other operational issues downstream and then potentially upstream that you may not know about until weeks, months later. So I think the really good format is to focus on how do you increment this from a very simple way, right? Don't try to do everything that you want to from a strategy side. You want to work with your revenue operations teams tightly. You want to figure out what the existing processes look like, and then have that discussion and have that kind of work through to be able to say, how do we simplify this? Because at the end of the day, if you simplify it for a partner, you simplify it for a customer. And that's always the one-to-one relationship. And so outside of that, I think there's going to have to be a deep dive for any individual or organization within your processes, within your current state, and then making sure that you're working through that to an ideal state that you can run in parallel. And then do pilots, right? I think that's something that's not leveraged very well for organizations. Everyone wants to go into production. They just want to drive everything into production. Hey, we've got the strategy, we've got this thing, we've got this initiative. Let's just drive it to production. Wait, time out.
Yeah.
Let's pause a moment, right? Is everyone aligned with this? Are we sure that this is going to return the investment that we've placed into it?
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers the question, but everything really stems on driving simplicity as much as possible, right?
Yeah, so maybe we dig into a little bit more, like if your company is dealing with technology partners, the agreements are on the back end on how they get paid. When you're dealing with a VAR or SI, systems integrator, the revenue sharing is deal by deal basis. And I understand the need to track how all of that is happening as it's happening. You want to see how many deals they're touching and influencing the close rates. And then, of course, how the revenue should be shared. I think the big thing I see missing in too many cases is operations isn't necessarily talking to the partners and figuring out what they already have on their plate, and then their appetite for what they can take on in addition to what they're already doing. They're this huge asset to your company. They're selling for you, and yet we're trying to put ownership for a lot of the data entry on them. And that, to me, feels backwards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I love that you bring that up, because I think this happens often, is the lack of the feedback loop, the communication loop, to find out. Again, when you think about your partner ecosystem or your partner programs, you have to define what that looks like. Because for some organizations, it could be that you just have a SI relationship, that you don't have VARs, you don't have distributors, you don't have procurement, you don't have MSPs, right? You don't have all these other program types that exist, which are differentiated. The more you know about that, the more of that type of relationship, that you know how it is going to exist, the better you can structure that internally. And what I mean by that is, so as you mentioned, the feedback loop, right? The feedback loop between an SI versus a VAR is going to be different. There's going to be similarities, but it's going to be different, right? Because for a VAR, they want to be able to go and quote out to a customer and provide their paper to a customer. That's just, it's pretty typical. SI, it's not necessarily the case unless you start getting into marketplace. Now, marketplace plays an interesting challenge in the whole mix of things. And so this is where stuff starts layering, as far as being able to say, how can a partner and us monetize, right? How can a partner monetize and really benefit from this relationship? And then how is that going to work with us, right? Because there could be more of the external monetization, which is directly with the customer, or through your organization, right? If you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to get monetary benefits for these different things that you've executed on. And the reason I say things is because it could be anything from such as procurement to implementation, right? And there's a huge band of different actions and activities that a partner can do and execute for a client. And so again, that just really depends on the organization. What's your budget? What are you willing to spend? Do you actually believe in partnerships, or are you going to create channel conflict and contention, which is then it's going to impact the partner on how monetization is going to look like, how much you're going to invest in the systems, how much you're going to help simplify it for them, how you're going to really push that customer journey into a partner journey, which is going to bounce its way back to a customer journey, if that makes sense. Because if you as an organization don't have your customer journey mapped out, you're going to have problems, right? And then you start bringing in partnerships into the mix of it, and you don't even know your customer journey, how you're really supporting that customer. Because the partner, you're trying to articulate, enable the partner to say, hey, we want you to do this, and they're going to look at you like, what does that look like? Like, what's your expectations behind that? And we can provide knowledge expertise probably better than you in many cases, but if you don't create that allowance for me, or you don't provide me the monetization for it, how's that going to look, right?
Yeah, what's in it for me is where everybody starts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, operations to me is always such a balance between what the business needs in terms of data and the experience for the whatever end user is stuck with providing it, and how you connect the two. It's tough.
Yeah, very tough. That's another thing I see that's missing oftentimes, is this neglect behind the data. And it's really, I find it interesting because as a content creator, as someone who's out there who's looking for different methodologies and different approaches and trying to quantify, looking at data and metrics and trying to identify what makes sense for a lot of organizations, and really pursuing that, is there a one size fits all? And the more I dive into it, the more the answer is no. But what's interesting is this common problem of the data and data model, right? And what you need to go and capture in order to get to a hypothesis or end conclusion. And just the often, what I mentioned earlier, the neglect behind it, right? Oh, we'll get to it. But then what happens is these organizations, and oftentimes someone's going to want an answer to something that you can't get because there's no data, or there's holes in that data model, data structure. And so then you're trying to derive to an answer from partial or really gross data, and everybody wants to have 100% confidence level in that. And you're like, statistically, the confidence level is like 10%, right? Because the data's just terrible. It sucks.
Yeah.
So there's a huge neglect, and it just continues to exist even in mature organizations, because there's either some cultural element, or there's a systems bounce back element, or something else that's out there occurring that's preventing this from getting to a place where you can start driving more insights because you have the right set of information and you've done things the right way. And
yeah. And I think as a consultant, I tend to get pulled into the two extremes of that spectrum. There's a spectrum, but it's either the management team didn't understand the value of operations and they were trying to make functional roles who seemed okay with the systems do things without understanding data schema and process and all that good stuff. And that's the messiest. And then on the other end, you had somebody in operations who was so oriented with data that they didn't really think through how it's impacting the end users and ultimately data quality, because people just wouldn't use the system. Do you see that too in consulting roles, or you see more like in between?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think you've really touched on something crucial there, right? It's a very common problem, which is one that I don't know what the magic answer is. And I've been asking and seeking what the magic answer. And it's interesting because we get in our conversations and we say the same thing. So it's just like, where's the miss? Like, where are we missing? Are we saying something the wrong way? Are we speaking a different language to our internal teams? What is it? Your head, you just start scratching your head and you feel like in this conundrum, like, how do I get myself out of this hell, right? And get myself into a good place. And it's interesting because I also think that there's what I'll call departmental contentions. So a very common, you and I have discussed this, marketing, right? And there's this weird place, like, so there's partnerships, and then there's a lot of organizations out there that have got partnerships embedded in marketing. And then there's other organizations that don't have partnerships embedded in marketing, they're embedded in sales. And you oftentimes have more of an issue where there's marketing and sales, and there's always marketing and sales in some form of contention, right? And then you start incorporating layer partnerships into it, and it just blows everything up. And you can't get to this common place because something simple as attribution can easily, your format in marketing can easily be leveraged for partnership ecosystems if you all collaborate and have that conversation. Just first in, multi-touch, right? Last out, like that model could work for partnerships.
Yeah, but we rarely think of it as a cross-functional tool. We all run with it in our silo and focus solely on marketing interactions. That's always driven me crazy, but I also understand the pitfalls of trying to incorporate everything into it, because then you get into the conversations about what's a worthy interaction to include and how much they should be weighted, and it's just a nightmare. You said the A word. I went on a spiral. I'm sorry. I have capital T trauma with the A word. Don't we all?
Absolutely. I love it. But I think there's just one example, and I think it's one that's a little bit more of a personal touch for someone. And again, this is like the data. Like, you've got some of the structure there. You've got the data there that you can go and use. You could potentially append to it, right? It's just, what's your thought process behind it, and what's your form of alignment? And then just thinking about the other pieces, right? So it's like marketing, you got this. You believe in this, you've got this model, you're the SME in that space, we could leverage it, fantastic. Now I can relook in sales and see how the engagement and activities work there and how we're being able to expand on that. And what's interesting also about this is there's a new form of conversation that's starting to get into the space of data analytics, both in revenue operations, partner operations, and just in general for organizations. Is so many organizations are focused on what I'll call the level one metrics, right? And it's your level one metrics are how many sales have you completed? What's the ARR? What was the total opportunity amount? Like these are just the straight line metrics that could spit out all day long. What's your lead conversion percentage, things like that. But what it neglects is when I start talking about level 2 and level 3 analysis, that starts getting into more of the correlation and the connections behind things and starting to drill down. Oh, okay, what's driving some of that success rate? And if we start expanding out on that information, what does that look like? Because then some of those, the outcomes of that helps you operationally to look back and say, what are we missing or what are we neglecting within our processes that can reduce the amount of overhead, both internally and externally to our partnerships. And the second you sit there and you dwell on level 1 and everyone thinks, oh, we've got our data analytics covered, you're wrong, because you're missing out on how you're going to drive more and more productivity and how you're going to make individuals' lives, especially the RevOps folks, better, right? Because it becomes less of a stress for us to go and figure out why something happened or what was the end result of it and have better decision pathways from, because we understand and we have that level 2 and level 3, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the crux of why so many operators get labeled tactical, is we get stuck fixing all the data and figuring out the level 1 instead of realizing that level 2 and level 3 require a ton of interpersonal skills and investigation and layering business context, because you're talking about analytics, but in order to understand why something's successful, you have to come up with a bunch of hypotheses and then go talk to the people with the business context that are actually in it to actually verify or form a new theory. That's where the real value of operations is, marrying the contextual with the qualitative.
And that's where the fun is for us, right? I think it breaks us out of this very minutious norm that we go through. It's, oh, here's a fire, here's another fire. And it's like at the end of the day, we often don't see a lot of good results from completing our fires. It just plugs a gap and makes the road somewhat smooth temporarily until the next pothole gets dug in. But I feel like this is where we like becoming those experts, and we have that drill down, that level of knowledge, and we start seeing how those relationships work internally. And that goes the same thing for partners. For partners, whenever it comes to partner operations, they're often asking, how do we collaborate better? What's the market going to look like for us? We don't get into the breakdown for the TAM with them often. So then when we talk about accounts, we're very selective. And it's, again, level 1. Here's your level 1 data. You're touching on 10 accounts rather than saying, hey, here's a way for us to expand our business together. And now the upstream to that is from the revenue ops side, our numbers are going up. It's looking good. And now we've got the data analytics to understand why. We've had this conversation with this partner. Here's their structure. Here's their profile. Here's what they reside. Here's their monetization. Here's the string through as far as being able to say how it's tied into the TAM and how they've expanded on the TAM and how productive they've been. Now they've become a model, and can we replicate that? So that's the level 2, level 3 within the whole mix of things. And that's oftentimes, again, one of those pieces that partner operations helps handle when revenue ops can't, because we're so focused on the top line of everything. We just, again, don't have the capacity to go do that. And so another key benefit of someone in partner operations or partner programs to have that skill set, to have a little bit of that vision, to work with it. And again, it becomes a strength through. Now revenue operations has a means to be able to say, oh, this is really working well. How can we reduce certain process cycles, right? Opportunity cycle, right? What does that look like? When a partner is engaged, it's 2 times faster, right? That we all know that. But now all of a sudden we start profiling certain partner types, and revenue operations can say, you know what? If you double down from a strategy standpoint of view on these partnerships, guess what you're doing? You're accelerating these different markets, right? Whether it's EPAC, somewhere in EPAC, or somewhere in Europe, or maybe Latin America. Domestically, we get down to the zip code level sometimes when we do territory assignments, right? So there's so much complexity, so much interweaving of things that can occur, that this space is it's very open, very ripe, and the opportunities are limitless. It's just organizations, and I think individuals need to understand this exists and there's a need, and there needs to be this reference because it creates better synergies within an organization.
Can we link to your partner ops versus RevOps report in the show notes is question number 1.
Yeah, yes.
They'll be there then. I'll work with you on figuring that out.
Yes.
So where can people find you to network and work with you?
Yeah, so I'm available on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me in LinkedIn. I'm often busy there interacting with folks and just trying to create more a community, especially for the RevOps space. And then also, I've got my website. Go ahead, feel free to take a look at it. It's www.thechannelmethod.com. And that's just another means you can contact me through that page as well. And I'm just always glad to help individuals, whether it's just to share insights or to move the needle within your space. Always glad to help individuals. And that's, I think, one of the reasons I really do appreciate what we do and what we're trying to focus on here in the Seattle market. Feel free to reach out and work with me.
Yeah, and if you're in the Seattle area and join the RevOps Co-op, we have a Seattle chapter, and we'd be happy to see you in person sometime. We're a little hit or miss, but we'll get better about it.
We're building it. It's going to be great. I see the expansion coming in. There's a lot of need. A lot of folks are, as I mentioned, energized. The RevOps Co-op has done a really good job of reaching out, and especially within when we talk about the operator network. I think it's often misunderstood and underrepresented and under-budgeted often. What's our best means is to have someone else that we can lean on, we can look to, or work with to make our lives a little bit better. Thank the RevOps Co-op for existing and being that mechanism.
Plus, the one-off vent sesh can be super helpful from time to time. Collaboration is key, but being able to vent to somebody who gets it is always nice.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.
Keep it RevOpsAF, y'all.